right, thank you very much. It's great to be here. So today I'm really excited to talk a little bit about how Riot Games makes globally impactful microsites. What's the right button here? So there we go. So globally impactful microsites is something that is a pretty core part of how we engage with our community. But first, before I dive into globally impactful microsites, I want to talk about a little bit about who we are. Who is Riot Games? As the name suggests, we are a gaming company. We produce and publish online competitive, usually multiplayer games, and we lean very heavily into the space of very serious gameplay. We have games and titles that span multiple genres and reach out to audiences across the entire globe. The audience is extremely passionate. The community is very engaging, and we embrace that. It's a part of who we are. And the players themselves are much more than just gamers. More often than not, we also like to reveal who we are through the reflection of this IP. And the games themselves are actually made to be spectated. And around this philosophy, we've created a pretty expansive esports ecosystem where the best of the best players are able to compete against each other in massive arenas around the world in front of hordes of fans. It's an incredibly epic experience. Outside of games and esports, we also have dabbled into storytelling. Storytelling is a fantastic way to be able to be culturally aligned and to be able to really reemphasize the fantastic IP that the world of Runeterra, which we've created. Available on Netflix, Arcane is a League of Legends story, and if you love fantastic storytelling and amazing animation, this one's definitely for you. All right, so that's a little bit about Riot Games. The speech itself is about globally impactful microsites. So we're going to break that down. What does globally mean? When we think of global, yeah, sure, we can talk about languages and we can talk about server locations and points of presence, but really globally is about regional relevancy, cultural sensitivity and awareness, having the right voice for the audience that you're trying to reach out to. It's incredibly important to not just speak the same language, but to be on the same level as where your audience is, or in our case, our players. To showcase a little bit about the scale of the audience of what we're talking about from Riot Games, within the League of Legends universe, we have about 180 million monthly active users. We span across 28 different languages for the publishing arm of just the League of Legends universe itself. It's a very humbling sort of responsibility, and we take it very seriously. So we talked about global, now let's talk about microsites. Different people can actually have a different definition of what a microsite means, so let me provide some clarity and context. To us, a microsite is usually ephemeral. It's a moment in time. It's something that we use to project something that's happening right now relevant to you. It often stands as its own independent .com, such as mycoolmicrosite.com, or sometimes it's on a subdomain, right, like mycoolmicrosite.leagueoflegends.com. But they exist as their own sort of domain structure. We use microsites as a way to reveal campaigns or have an announcement platform that is specifically isolated to a particular type of message that we're trying to convey. Some years, we actually put out dozens of microsites. And some of these microsites are regionally targeted. They'll only be available in some regions in the world, whereas most of our microsites are globally launched across the entire globe. Globally launched, yeah, right? So today, we're going to talk about one of those microsites. Specifically, back in 2022, towards the end, we worked with the social impact team to create a charity voting experience that was globally launched. As any good tech lead would do, we started with tech requirements. What exactly do we need to do to build this thing out? This particular application had a few sort of moving parts that, when culminated together, created the cohesive digital experience. We needed geolocation to specifically target where our players were at to provide that regional relevancy. We needed to have authentication for the integrity of the voting and true identity of our players to ensure that their voices were actually heard. Localization is a big deal. It's not just translating words. Localization is a strategy for being regionally relevant, and we're going to touch on that in a minute. Voting and data persistence, that's pretty an obvious one for any kind of a voting site. You got to have somewhere to store these votes. But remember the number I showed you on the last couple of slides? 180 million monthly actives. That turns it into a slightly different conversation about scale, so we have to approach it in a different way. This website also did have different phases. We had an opening phase, voting phase, and a closing phase. So these were the tech requirements for this particular website. Here are some designs. First, you kick off with the landing page, and you see a little bit of information about the actual website, and you kick off with the call to action. You get started. Once you log in, we map you to the region of where you are based off of the geolocation information. And once we've mapped you to that particular region, you are then presented with a choice of 3 charities. All of the charities are actually winners in this voting ecosystem, but the players are voting to where the most of the donation dollars will go to. All the charities ended up receiving donation dollars, but players were voting on where the lion's share would go to. Regional relevancy. If you were in a different region, we actually had different charities that were available for those regions. Here's what I mean when I talk about localization is different than translation. When we work with local leaders to find the charities that will make the most impact on those regions, that provides us with an opportunity to make the most impact while thinking globally, but acting locally. Cool, so we got the requirements, we know what the design's supposed to look like. I heard this is a composable conference, right? So let's talk a little bit about some composable muscle that Riot Games has already built up over the years to reduce risk, reduce the time to market, and to provide a consistent experience across all of our different web experiences. Starting with the localization pipeline. As you can imagine, we need a lot of translations. So it starts with creating source content. Our source content can be in any language and any content type. It could be an image, video, audio clip, whatever. We start with that source content, and we'll store it inside of a content management system or our source control manager like GitHub. From there, we send it off to be localized. That process itself is an automated pipeline in which the consuming part of the translations will receive it through our CMS or our source control like GitHub, and we'll have a collaborative meeting with the translation team to make sure that they're aware of context. Context is important with translations. You would be surprised how many words carry multiple meanings. One example that I have for my history is explaining the difference between the word duck, right? This is not the quacking poultry. This is to lower your body so you can miss a projectile. Context is important. So this process itself, this process itself is fully automated, and we are able to receive translations of about 10,000 words or so from 28 different languages within about a 24 to 48 hour turnaround time with no developer involvement and automated release cycles. This is a part of our muscle that we built up over the years, and this is part of how we are able to have our own composable web structure with localization. And once we get it all back, we QA it, make sure everything looks good, verify that not only the words are translated, but the fonts and the character sets are properly supported. There's no spillage. If we're working with right to left support, make sure that that's looking very good too, because if you haven't built a website with right to left support, it's a fun challenge. I highly recommend trying it out. All right, so we talked about localization. What about some other muscle? Libraries for authentication. That's a pretty common one. So a part of our libraries and muscles that we built with authentication includes a few different and easily embeddable JavaScript widgets that empowers our developers to have authentication and authorization within about 5 minutes of starting their project. It's a single line of JavaScript that they slap into their website, and it includes the header and the footer of their website. And the content of that header and footer is actually remotely managed in a CMS, and the updates for that are able to propagate without rebuilding a website. Pretty slick. And embedded with this header and footer, lovingly called Riot Bar, is a cross-site sign-on utility. Cross-site sign-on is very important for a multi-domain ecosystem where a player could log in on www.riotgames.com and then they traverse to www.leagueoflegends.com. We want you to maintain your identity along the way without forcing you to have to re-authenticate for various digital experiences. So these libraries help us to, again, reduce risk, reduce time to market, and provide developers with a fantastic experience when they're making microsites on Riot's behalf. Now, another piece is using existing APIs. Don't reinvent the wheel, just realign it. If you have an existing API that suits the needs of what you're trying to do, yeah, sure, you can build it. We're all developers. We love building stuff, but do you really want to, right? There are so many other things that we could be doing with our time. So for this particular application, we did reuse some of our own internal tools, allowing us to solve some of those business cases, storing votes at scale, being able to truly target the geolocation of an individual by more than just their origin IP, but also with the information of what we know about their account. These kinds of tools really allowed for us to not need to go back and rebuild them just for a moment in time ephemeral site. All right, so I talked a little bit about Riot Games and our muscle, but wait a minute, this isn't a Riot Games conference, right? I'm in the right room? This is a Netlify conference. So where does Netlify actually come into play? Well, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. So there's a few pieces of the Netlify technology ecosystem that we definitely leverage as a way to power these digital experiences. One of them is the need for our homepage redirect. I mentioned before that our microsites were actually on different domains, mycoolmicrosite.com, right? But we have multiple languages. And the way that we actually identify the language is not through some cookie, et cetera, but the good SEO strategy is actually to have the language as a part of the path, and we definitely leverage that. But wait a minute, what happens if someone goes to just the root homepage of your website and you want to redirect them to where they want to go? For example, if you're in Brazil, we want to take you to the PTBR path because that's the language you speak. It makes sense, right? To do this in Netlify is pretty easy. Many of you are probably already familiar with the redirect syntax. This really opens up the capacity for us to not have to reinvent this wheel. Just realign it. Oh yeah, you're gonna take that one with you. Now, to take it a step further, we actually share out a pretty common set of redirects files as a way to distribute the common shared attributes for how we determine redirects. So our developers working on different microsites don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? Okay. All right, so another thing that we heavily use Netlify for is to make sure that when we are getting ready, when we're in our dressing room, nobody sees us while we're in the process of getting everything together. Having a restricted development environment gives you the confidence to develop with a strong QA process, delivering it out to different managers and stakeholders who have interest in seeing the progression of this web application, but at the same time, making it so you don't ruin the surprise and delight to your target audience. Boy, it's embarrassing when someone comes across your website and it's halfway baked and you see some demonstration text that maybe shouldn't have been committed to begin with. We've all done that. So by using Netlify firewall rules, edge functions, et cetera, we're able to really create a strong protective barrier around our web applications, giving us the confidence to develop any kind of internal sort of private IP without having to reinvent that wheel. So thank you, Netlify, for providing that for us. And the final thing that Netlify offers, I'm going to rant about today, is functions. So, Netlify functions, probably have heard about them. What we leverage them for specifically is to provide internal proxies to our gateways. It's a very common pattern. Getting around the cross-origin request scripting, getting around the capacity for authentication, in which authentication cookies are often on the same domain and are sometimes stored as HTTPS and secure. So HTTP-only cookies can only be read on backend, right? They can't be read on client side. So by using a Netlify function on a backend, we're able to read those secure tokens, those secure cookies from the authentication, validate the user identity, and have that as a part of our cohesive CI/CD process all the way through, no matter what deploy preview you're on, branch deploy, et cetera, et cetera. And another cool trick that we use Netlify functions for is API stubs for like integration tests. If you have some kind of an ecosystem that reaches out to an external API, but you also want to have automated tests, unit tests are great for doing mock implementations, but sometimes having a full end-to-end implementation is also helpful. But if the API itself doesn't want you to run tests against their services, you can use mock data from like Netlify functions with same kind of data contracts. So there's all sorts of cool tricks that we use Netlify functions for to provide us with the muscle of getting out these interactive, engaging digital experiences. Cool. So we talked about global, we talked about microsites, but wait a minute. Your title was globally impactful microsites. So what's the impact? As engineers, we often fall into the trap of immediately going to solution orientation. How do I build this? How do I make this happen? But it's good to reflect on the why. Why are we doing this thing? What is the goal? What's the reason? And is that goal measurable? And can we go back and identify if we won after the fact? In this particular case, for the karma voting microsite, the desire, or the KPIs, whatever acronyms you want to use, was to provide our players with a chance to voice their vote on where charity donation dollars could go in their regions of interest. That was the goal. And the impact of this was we had a pool of over $6 million donated across 28 different regions. Each region had 3 choices of charities, and the total of about 775,000 users voiced exactly where they wanted the majority of those donation dollars to go to. All in all, this was a pretty resounding success for our social impact team, and we definitely considered this website to be impactful. So, thank you very much for listening to me rant about globally impactful microsites. Good game, and well played. Thank you.